This week, well, we remember the clean energy life of former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, who died last week at the age 100. Not only did he put solar panels on the roof of the White House in 1979, he also helped clean up a nuclear accident in Canada. I'm not kidding, when he was in the Navy. Remarkably, Brian, you won't be able to find a single photograph of him in a cape.
New York State follows the example of Vermont and passes a law forcing fossil fuel companies to pay the costs of extreme weather caused by climate change. So now that Vermont has proven itself to be a world leader on an issue, we could go back to ignoring them.
Fine. We take a look back at the 1970s oil crisis that caused Carter to put those solar panels on the White House. That was the OPEC oil embargo that rocked my and Brian's world when we were kids. Almost as much as tabletop hockey and glam rock.
On his way out of office, Joe Biden has enacted a ban on oil drilling in nearly all federal waters. After the announcement, Joe immediately went for a nap, secure in the knowledge that everything he's done for a clean, green U.S. economy is fully secure and will never be messed with.
All that and more on this edition of The Clean Energy Show. And also this week, a bonus story for our Patreon supporters, because we got too long of an episode here, but I'm going to have a little bit extra there for our Patreon listeners on what's ahead for 2025 and some of the EVs that are coming out and some of the challenges and hopes for this year in clean energy. Brian, you're going to talk a little bit about the Consumer Electronics Show and EVs in super cold weather.
Yeah, so I was on the YouTube, as I often am.
How often?
And I came across videos from Yakutsk in Siberia, in Russia. Have you ever seen any of these?
Is that like the coldest populated city in the world type of thing? Yeah.
Yes. And the channel Kyun B is the name of the channel, and it's a woman who lives in Yakutsk. And this is apparently the coldest populated city in the world. We always complain about how cold it is here.
And it is.
And it is. Yakutsk is a little bit colder, not by an insane amount. Let's be real here.
Is this the place where they keep the combustion cars running for days because they won't start, so they just leave them running?
Yes, they just keep them running. So
I laugh at your coldness.
I just thought it was interesting because, we always talk about how cold it is, and they are actually colder. It sounds like their winter is kind of like about 9 months where it's cold, and ours is, 5 months or so. And it can get down to minus 70 Fahrenheit or minus 70 Celsius, which is even colder in Fahrenheit, I believe.
Pretty close to 0 Kelvin, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of the scale, but it's getting there.
Yeah. So insanely cold, definitely colder than here for longer periods of time. And these videos, it turns out there's quite an appetite for videos about cold places. There are tens of millions of views on this channel.
Maybe I should be making more then, hey? Maybe I should.
I'm gonna get to that.
Okay.
So, tens of millions of views. There's a huge appetite for these videos about living in the world's coldest populated city. And a lot of them are about cars, but they are, combustion cars. And it's all the weird things that they do to keep their combustion cars going in the winter. So a lot of them have these quilted blankets that they put over their cars. So
the whole thing?
You park your car at the end of the day, you put the quilted blanket over it to try and keep the heat in.
Okay.
And then there's a little pipe for the exhaust. So, when you then go to start your car, and they would have block heaters like we do. But you go and start your car and there's a pipe for the exhaust. So they leave it running with this quilted blanket on the car to help build up the heat. And there was another one where a guy put a tarp over his car and then put a propane heater underneath the car, so kind of shooting underneath the engine, and left this propane heater going for an hour or two.
This is a combustion car we're talking about. We're not talking about EVs.
Yeah, these are all combustion cars. And it's worse than we have it here. They close the schools when it hits minus 50 Celsius.
Oh.
Yeah. And they don't have school buses. They only have public transit. So the kids that take the school bus, they take the public transit, and they follow this one kid in one where he sits at a bus stop. And if the bus is late, he just goes home because he, you can only wait 5-10 minutes in this environment. But so I started looking around for, okay, well, there must be EVs in Yakutsk. And so I start doing these search terms, and surely somebody must have an EV in Yakutsk. And, wouldn't be ideal for any type of car, including an EV. But I thought, well, if you have a good plug-in at home, you'd need a 240 volt plug-in at home. If you were able to drive it to work and then have a plug-in at work, yeah, you could do that. But it's, nothing much came up. So I typed in, electric cars, Yakutsk, Siberia, and your video about your Nissan Leaf was the number 5 search result on that.
Wow. We're nowhere near Siberia if you're geographically challenged. So
no, but what came up were other cold weather videos about electric cars and Teslas. The first one was the guy in Saskatoon who froze his Tesla a few years ago and made a video about it. So and that video of yours, I think it's got about 250,000 views. It's on the Clean Energy Show YouTube channel. Yeah, it just proves that there's an appetite for this kind of content. So if you want to freeze your butt making more electric car videos in the winter.
Even when I look at those videos in the summer, I think, holy crap, is it really that close? Because there's a video of driving down the street and you see all the exhaust, and all it is exhaust from cars is creating a fog because it doesn't dissipate.
No, in Yakutsk, in all these videos, because it's so cold there's kind of like an ice fog over the whole city the whole time. It has nothing to do with car exhaust. The whole place just looks frosty and foggy and cold the whole time. And they even have some drone shots in these videos. They're quite well produced. They're nicely made. They have drone shots, but, I imagine can only fly a drone for a minute or two before the battery freezes and then it crashes to Earth.
I mean, the drone length of flight is getting longer, but still, I would think that you're right. A couple of minutes might be, and then maybe it'll just die and fall from the sky. Like it may not have time to land before it realizes, oh my God, I'm frozen. The battery's not putting out any voltage anymore.
So, a lot of people don't bother with cars who live in Yakutsk because it's a huge pain in the butt. Some of them, they just leave them running sometimes. Just,
Well, I would think, getting into a warm bus would be the way to go. Like, it's already heated. Assumably it keeps warm. I mean, it's hard to keep buses warm because there's such a large volume of air there to keep warm. But
and so there's another video they explained, like newer buildings in Yakutsk tend to have, like newer apartment buildings tend to have individual propane or natural gas heaters in the units. But the older buildings, they have a bunch of it is district heating. So they have these coal-fired furnaces that, they showed a guy literally shoveling coal into these furnaces to, keep the heat on. And, they can't fall asleep on the job. If they fall asleep on the job and the fire dies too much, people are going to freeze in their home. So, a lot of it is these pipes that run through town, and they can't bury the pipes because it's like, it's permafrost. It's, tundra. You can't bury them. So they're above ground pipes that feed heat to a lot of the buildings.
Wow. I was thinking about making a new video about driving in my Nissan Leaf without a heater.
And because it's broken.
Because it's broken and it's really expensive to get fixed, more than the car is probably even worth right now. It's like $4,000, $5,000 because they have to tear it apart. There's a lot of labor involved. And I know that Teslas, sometimes the heaters go in other cars and it's like, $1,500 or even less to fix, which is a lot more doable for a car. But yes, we are driving it. My daughter took it to school this morning. It's a Tuesday. We are recording the podcast. I don't go out into the cold weather. But we've discovered that my old driver's license ID is really good for scraping the inside of the window.
Okay, yep.
So I want to go to the hardware store and get one of those credit card ice scrapers for a couple of bucks. And I don't know why I don't have 6 of them right now. It's kind of stupid, but the inside of the window keeps getting frosted. So it's a challenge. And we have chemicals for de-icing, same as, the airlines use, and all kinds of, we've got a heated blanket that plugs into the 12 volt. I've got a little heated, air defroster. It does nothing. They never did. I had one when I was a 20-year-old, they don't do squat really. So off of 12 volts in a car, you can't do a whole lot of heating because, the heating in an electric car is like 7 hair dryers. It's like 7,000 watts. And it comes from the high voltage battery. So that's why another reason why it's expensive is because it connects to the high voltage. The car is, oh, by the way, it's happy birthday to my car, the Nissan Leaf from 2013. It was made in January 2013. That's what the label says on the car. So it is now, how old is it? It's 12 years old now. I can't believe that. It's hard to hear myself say that. It's a 12-year. And of course, people said, you know, my laptop battery lasts 2 years. I'm never going to buy an EV. This is when I bought the car at 5 years old. And I don't know what to tell you. It's still running. If the heater was working, it would be a godsend. If I lived in a warmer climate, if I had a higher trim level, which most of them aren't, the higher trim levels that are out there, but if I had one trim level higher, I think it would have come with a heat pump that year. So I would have had the heat pump operational down to, say, is that a cat in front of your screen, or what the hell is going on?
Yeah, the cat has joined us.
Okay, that is a weird effect. I thought you were disappeared into the abyss. Yeah, your cat, Calypso, the clean energy cat, has joined the podcast and is pretty much speechless at this point, but still there. She's not typing, is she?
No, just rubbing her face on the top of my laptop.
Okay, why not? I do that every morning. So, yeah, happy birthday to my car. It's still running. I love it. It does need some work. It needs some front suspension work, which I'm saving up for. That's been overdue for 2 years now, but if it doesn't fall apart and die, that would be great. But yeah, it's been a challenge in cold weather. It's for some reason it's worse this year. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the moisture that you had on your heat pump is the moisture that I have inside the car. Like it's just a more moist winter, which usually they're quite dry here.
So getting back to Yakutsk. I'm totally hooked on these videos, but one of them is he's shown winterizing his car. It's again a gas car, but he's doing things like he put a felt pad over the engine, which is a thing, again, people do to keep the heat in. But what I was going to mention was you're having problems with the frost on the inside of the windows, and that's always a problem when it's super cold, even if your car is working properly.
They have these problems there too, don't I? I think I've seen a video about it where the guy was trying to go on a 50-kilometer journey and...
Yeah. So they put sometimes a second layer of plastic on the inside of the windows, and that helps to keep the frost out. And I had a vague memory when we were kids... Sometimes people did that on the side windows in a car. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, sort of right. I completely forgot about those things.
Yeah. A rectangular shaped piece of plastic. I don't know what they're called, but yeah, I suddenly had a flashback memory.
And can you buy them anymore?
No, I don't think you can buy them anymore. But that's, back in the 70s, people would put these plastic rectangular sheets on the inside windows, and that little window would stay clear from the frost.
In the prairies of Canada, we should qualify that. I completely forgot about those. Now I want to look them up. Yeah. I really want to look them up. And oh my God, I haven't had an early childhood memory dredged up like that in a long time. That's amazing. It's I'm just trying to visualize it. Yeah. I didn't dream that. That's real. There were little rectangular plastic things on the side windows of cars. Yeah. And because we live in a very cold climate, but interesting. What else about the town? Like, why do people, we did a bit of a feature on it once, and I can't remember if it's like mining or why people live there, but I mean, why do we live here? Yeah. We live here because we were born here. But
it sounds like mining. Mining is what established the town, but it's still surprising that 400,000 people. This is a pretty large city.
That's a lot of people. It's bigger than our place.
I want to mention quickly the Consumer Electronics Show opens today in Las Vegas, and I'm always interested in that. And often there's clean energy technology. Nothing so far. It's just the first day, other than Sony is now taking pre-orders for their electric car, which they've been teasing for a while now. It's not going to come out till 2026. It's going to be very expensive, like $80,000, $90,000.
$90,000 for But why? What do you get? You could play a video game in it or something?
Well, if you're a big Sony fan, I'm sure you're going to be interested in it. It sounds like Honda is involved somehow.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm not holding my breath. It's not going to be till 2026. They're going to only sell them in California to start off with. And you can put down a deposit. So that was interesting. But the thing I was most interested in, we were talking about, I bought a robotic vacuum cleaner recently, And so Roborock, the company that makes my robot vacuum, has now unveiled
a country named Roborock there for a second. That was really going to blow my mind.
Sorry, company Roborock. They have a new model that's coming out later this year, and it has an arm on it that'll pick up stuff that's in the way. Like if you leave your sock on the floor, this little arm will come out, pick up the sock, toss it aside, and keep vacuuming.
Oh, you have to upgrade. You have to upgrade.
Yeah, I'm going to have to upgrade. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Because, of course, you have to clean up for the robot vacuum.
That's why we've never used our $100 Roomba we got from place called Access Cargo that existed what kind of a store would you call that?
I remember that. Yeah, just a liquidation kind of store.
Liquidation world. Yeah, that kind of place. Yeah, so we never use it because we got it when we had kids, so there's Lego everywhere, right? And and now there's still somehow crap everywhere, like, Christmas ball hooks are a thing that we find year round now. If you're vacuuming and you're pulling them out of the vacuum cleaner head. But I did buy a letter opener off of Amazon for mere dollars that I use now to take the hair out of the vacuum cleaner roller. I just put it in and go right across the roller. It takes all the hairs out. And I've got a lot of hairs. My daughter has long hair. And I pull one of her out, a head of her hair out of the vacuum cleaner every time I clean it. So there's a lot of her DNA around. It's just everywhere. And of course,
hot tip. So use a letter opener.
Yes. Yes.
Is it the kind with the little razor blade?
Yes, but it's like a hook shape. So there's plastic up here and a blade down here. And it's a thin piece of plastic that you hook under the hair and it just pulls it into the blade, which is at the part of the triangle that comes together or whatever you want to call it. So So geography, blades, and vacuum cleaner tips from James here in the Clean Energy Show. Brian, it's awards season for the movie industry. You and I are movie fans, different kinds of movie fans, but The Brutalist is a film about an architect who comes from Hungary and sort of emigrates to Manhattan. And, you almost made a movie. You were thinking about making a movie about an architect. You're an architecture fan. Are you going to go see it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. This is kind of the hot film amongst, the circle of friends that I hang out with. Everyone's very excited to see this. 3.5 hours long, which I'm not normally a fan of, but if it's a good movie, sure. So it comes with an intermission, because one thing I hate is very long movies that don't come with an intermission. This one does. It has an intermission.
Because you will have to almost certainly go to the bathroom or do something. A lot
3.5 hours. Yeah, that's a long time. It was shot on film, and it is showing on film in select places on 70 millimeter prints. It sounds like most of it was shot in VistaVision, which is horizontal 35 millimeter, which is interesting.
Even more real estate for the film to be.
It's similar to a 70 millimeter, but they're making 70 millimeter prints, so there's a few places you can.
Is it in black and white
film? No, I think it's color.
Okay, so they shot it on film. Anyway, you're looking forward to that. You can pre-order it now on iTunes for $20.
Oh, already? Okay,
already. So. There seems to be a fruit fly in my midst. I hate them. You know where they come from? Fruit?
Yeah.
I don't know why they're up here.
Have to stop buying fruit.
Yeah. Got to stop buying fruit. Just chocolate from now on. Well, we did a bonus podcast, our first of the year last week for our Patreon members, and that was fun. We talked about EV truck terrorism, which the 2 terrorist incidents in the States were from EVs, oddly enough. And, I noticed that in the press conference, because I eat my lunch watching terrorism press conference from the sheriffs. They said they made the point of pointing out in the Las Vegas Cybertruck incident that it was not in full self-driving mode at the time of the attack. So it was sitting there and it blew up.
Yeah.
It was detonated by the driver. And to make a political statement, he was obviously suicidal. And they had to point out that it wasn't in full self-driving mode because, hysteria around full self-driving and Teslas and So it's the start of the year, 2025. I'm optimistic about it being a good year for us, if you don't mind me saying. And I want to thank all of our Patreon members. And yeah, I just wanted to point all of them out and say thank you to them. Here they are. Randy Saylor, Robu, Aaron Norden, Peter O'Donnell, Andy Fessler, David Klanke, Brent Routley, pardon my vision, it is still impaired, Bradley, Ariana, Wes S. Ryder, Mike, Damon Cornelius, N. Rob Kennedy, Weldon Penner, Scott Jansen, Sam Sam Gemmis, pardon me, Sam, Michael Berkey, Sean Hines, Green Bastard, Bob Armstrong, Timo Kellenberger, one that I can't pronounce, Iridi Skenzia. I don't know why such a weird name that you would make me say that. Michael P. Danscock and Hilliam Waden. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. If you are in the Clean Club or higher, you get a shout out on our podcast and video credits on our video podcast. But I just wanted to thank everyone who has signed up for a Patreon account and is supporting our show in one way or another.
Yeah, I'm going to sign up under a weird name just so that you have to say it.
Well, Sunday was the first day of congestion pricing in Manhattan. And what is congestion pricing? It is a price that is put on people entering the center of a city, usually the center of a city where it is very congested. And they use electronic cameras to ding you every time you go in. It's $9 now. And that is kind of seen as too low for working because other cities have done this. London does it. They've just expanded how far that reach goes in London. And yeah, it's been very slow. Our one-time guest on the show, Corey Cantor with Bloomberg, said, I noticed less cars and quieter noise. A lot of people are saying that there's less cars. There's people posting a lot of Google traffic maps and things like that going on. Anyway, Jimmy Carter passed away, former president of the United States, when you and I were lads. Mr. Carter came to assist in the cleanup of major nuclear accident near Ottawa in 1952. Now, we've mentioned this on the show before and was, whoever mentioned it, the other person was surprised. I remember that. This isn't talked about very often,
No, he did a heroic thing and it didn't somehow affect his health. I mean, he exposed himself to radiation.
Maybe we should all be doing that, Brian.
That's the key to long life. But yeah, that was always an amazing story. But I mean, it happened so long, like he's so old, 1952, like that's such ancient history. But he absolutely helped clean up a major nuclear accident here in Canada.
People think that he went from peanut farmer to the White House. Not true. He was in the Navy and he had a yellowed certificate issued in 1953 by the Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory in New York State, proclaiming Mr. Carter an atomic submariner. He was a naval officer at the time he received it, and he attended the U.S. Naval Academy from 43 to 46 on his way to becoming the first in his family to graduate from college and served in the submarine fleet during World War II. And later he was involved in the development of the nation's first nuclear-powered submarines. The Knowles certificate was for completing his training in this, and on December 12th, 1952, a series of missteps and a mechanical failure led to the partial meltdown of the core of the NRX reactor at Chalk River Laboratories on the Ottawa River in Canada, about 180 kilometers northwest of the capital, Ottawa, Canada. The incident gave Canada the dubious distinction of hosting the world's first nuclear reactor accident. The NRX had a capacity of just 30 megawatts. That's not much. Not much at all. That's a small solar farm that day, which was powerful by the standards of its time. Today, the Bruce Power nuclear reactor in Ontario turns out 6,400 megawatts. On the day of the accident, the reactor was powered down for an inspection of its cooling system. In the basement, a worker mistakenly raised a few of the control rods that could be reduced and, if necessary, completely shut down their chain of reaction in the reactor. And that was spotted quickly, and a supervisor thought, based on some signal lights, that he had lowered the rods back in place. But the lights were wrong. 2 of the 3 of the rods were stuck and only had partly returned to safety when the supervisor, who was still in the basement, phoned the control room with directions for lowering the rods. He also mixed up the numbers for the buttons that needed to be pushed, compounding the problem. The reactor's output soared to about 100 megawatts from 30, and that power surge lasted for only 1 minute and 8 seconds before the reactor was brought back under control. But the damage was profound. Fuel rods had melted or blown apart. The basement was filled with 1 million gallons of highly radioactive water and debris. The reactor building, which had large glass windows, was dangerously radioactive. A contingent of 150 members of the U.S. military came to Chalk River for the cleanup. Among them was Mr. Jimmy Carter, future president of the United States, who led a group of about 12 members of the Navy from the Knowles Laboratory, and they were joined by 862 workers at the Chalk River site, 170 members of the Canadian Army, and 20 employees of companies that had made parts of the reactor. And we have a link to that story in the New York Times. So, yeah, I think he went down for 90 seconds at a time.
Yeah.
Was brought back up, and then, you take another turn of 90 seconds. So, yeah, that's a bit of history that even us Canadians don't hear about. That was the world's first nuclear accident.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so moving on to other news from the New York Times. Governor Kathy Hochul signed on Thursday, this is December 26th, this story is from, signed a law that requires companies that are big fossil fuel polluters to help pay to repair the damage caused by extreme weather, which, of course, is becoming more common because of greenhouse gas emissions. It's called the Climate Change Superfund Act, and it mandates that companies responsible for the bulk of carbon emissions between 2000 and 2024 pay about $3 billion each year for 25 years. So this law was modeled after the original Superfund law, which was established in 1980, and that required companies to pay for the cleanup of toxic waste from incidents like oil and chemical spills. So the idea is that taxpayers are the ones largely on the hook for this, and that is not particularly fair, and it won't cover all of the costs by any means. So the taxpayers are going to still pay for a lot of this, but as the ones who made a ton of money off of selling all these fossil fuels, it absolutely makes sense to do this. And we spoke about Vermont this past summer. That was a show we talked about on the show. Vermont led the way in this. They were the first ones to pass a law like this, and this could pave the way for other states to start doing the same thing, because it's going to be a massive cost. The article says it's going to cost about $500 billion around New York State by 2050 to deal with all of these climate emergencies and floods and tornadoes and everything, which is $65,000 per household. Between now and 2050. That's what it's going to cost
Brian,
each household.
Climate change isn't real. What do you have to say?
Well, you should listen to the show more, James. Then.
Okay. Well, that's $3 billion each year for 25 years based on 2000 to 2024. And of course, they're still polluting. They're still making things worse. They're still lobbying to make things worse. They're still covering up and greenwashing and doing all kinds of horrible things so that they can keep making money at our expense.
And the law could have billed them for damage even prior to 2000, but that seems like something of a fair compromise, I guess, because, we've known very, very clearly since at least the year 2000. I mean, we know it's earlier than that, but to make them pay for damage since the year 2000 seems like a somewhat fair compromise. We're not making them pay for damage from the 1950s, but, maybe we should.
Now, I would think that this is going to be tied up in court and legal battles for so long that, by the time it's resolved, perhaps that, the fossil fuel companies are not the same as they are today. And that's an issue because we expect some of these smaller and mid-level companies to go bankrupt in the next 20 years. And they're not going to clean up their mess. Even the big ones are not cleaning up their mess. That is a huge liability. And of course, we're already subsidizing them. And we're going to have to subsidize them in the future as we clean up their mess because they're just getting away with murder around here.
Yeah, around here it's things like abandoned oil wells that aren't being cleaned up properly, and taxpayers end up paying for that. But it's nice that there is a precedent for this, the Superfund Act from 1980. So this is hopefully established well enough in law that any challenges can hopefully be defeated.
There's been a lot of talk about Jimmy Carter's, legacy for clean energy. And I do think that Biden is the bigger person for his effect on climate, but it's hard to sort of quantify what Carter did. Now, he did this because the 1970s, there was oil crises. There was two of them. And I thought I would revisit them because even though you and I were alive, I was 7 years old when the first oil crisis happened. So I wasn't, our family watched the evening news. So I was cognizant, but I wasn't really fully understanding everything. But it's also, I've forgotten. And it's amazing what happened back in the 70s because of the oil crisis. So even if you are elderly like Brian and I, you've probably forgotten what had happened, a lot of what had happened. My house was built as a response to the oil crisis in the 70s. It's a passive solar house. So in the late 1960s, Israel attacked some of its neighbors and took some territory. And in 1973, those people, did a surprise attack on the holiest day in Israel, Yom Kippur, and that was called the Yom Kippur War. Egypt and Syria attacked Israel on their most holy holiday, and it was kind of unexpected. The place was shut down. And when U.S. President Richard Nixon provided Israel with $2.2 billion with emergency aid, OPEC, that is the cartel of oil-producing nations in the Middle East and some South America, they were formed in 1960, but they hadn't really been making much of a stink until then. And that's when they asserted their dominance and power, and they said, no, we're mad at you for supporting Israel, so we're going to embargo oil to your country. And back then, the United States, I think, got 40 to 60% of its oil imported from the Middle East. Right now, it makes a lot of its own oil, thanks to fracking and other things. But back then, they were very dependent on the Middle East.
But also, it's the energy crisis that forced them to get into more oil production. They realized that they couldn't be dependent. So, it really spurred on the American oil industry. And of course, they get a bunch of their oil from Canada as well.
Yeah, and, the countries that supported Israel, even if we didn't send them money, like Canada was also affected, and so was much of Europe. Unlike now, they imported most of their oil, and gas prices shot up. And people hoarded too, because they still do that. We found that out in the COVID era, that people will hoard. I hoarded toilet paper a little bit. And I have a bidet, which helped a lot. I'm going to talk more about bidets, less toilet paper use. That's why I want an electrical outlet near your bidet in your newly built cottage. I think it needs to be there. Okay. And because you can get air dryers now for bidets, like it's a total happy experience. You going to the bathroom now if you have the right bidet. So gas prices shot up and people hoarded, and there was mass shortages and, of course, long lineups. I remember that image in the news, long lineups at the gas pumps. And then people, rationing took place. You could only get so much gas. And it would take years to get more production online domestically, as you said. This can't happen overnight. And the embargo ended in March 1974, but high oil prices persisted, and that added to inflation, or stagflation, they called it, because, wages weren't going up, but the inflation still was. So the U.S. enacted a national speed limit of 55 miles per hour. That I forgot about. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was a big deal. And 55 is pretty slow for highway speeds, especially on the interstates that they have down there, which are these amazing, super highways.
Yeah, they deem that the most fuel efficient speed. And is that like 90 kilometers an hour or something like that? I think it is.
Yeah.
It's not very, very fast. So,
but you do save a lot of gas. It's an exponential thing. Like the wind resistance builds up exponentially. So driving in 55 saves a lot of gas.
That's true for an EV. If you ever find yourself on the highway with less range than you expected, what you do is you slow down. And I remember doing that in a gas car too, based on something I vaguely remembered that my driver instructor said in high school. and I got home to the city safely. That was a scary incident. So, yeah. It would take years to get that production up, decades even, so the embargo ended, but the U.S. enacted this speed limit of 55 miles per hour, which people were not happy about. This was a national speed limit, and it lasted for years. Daylight saving time was extended from 74 to 75, thought to reduce electricity and natural gas and heating oil consumption, and that was estimated to save 150,000 barrels a day just from daylight savings, because people would come home and not have to turn on the lights, which, used a lot of electricity back then. There was no LED lighting. Yeah. And that was, they called it the lighting company, some people, keep the lights on, because that was the main thing you thought about electricity. It's the first thing that it brought to your household was evening lighting. And that's happening now in Africa. Like, villages in Africa are now getting light, and that's the first thing they get. Charging their phones as well. We certainly didn't have those. So a second energy crisis occurred after the Iranian Revolution in 1978 and the fall of the Shah in 79. Iran was then the largest oil exporting country, and this caused panic buying again, and the price of oil doubled in 12 months. States like California, New York, Texas, and New Jersey enacted gasoline rationing and all kinds of other laws that said, hey, we have to conserve energy. So it was a whole decade of being very conscious of this stuff. And these densely populated states made consumers buy gas based on the last digit of their license plate. So if it was odd, you could buy it on odd days, odd calendar days, and so forth. So you couldn't buy gas anytime you wanted to. So that means if you were taking a trip and you had to fill up, you couldn't. You had to stay home. And they encouraged you to do that. So the government called on consumers to conserve energy and limit unnecessary travel. Some European countries banned travel on Sundays. And this was talked about, Brian, in Texas, too. There's news reports on YouTube, and people are crapping their pants thinking the NFL is not happy because they were saying, we can't play football in empty stadiums. Well, turns out in 2020 you could. So... yeah, they thought there would be no people in the stands, and they would move their games to Saturdays, which is when the college football plays here in the United States, or over in the United States. The sale of compact, fuel-efficient cars took off, and Japanese automakers benefited from this. OPEC's share of the world oil market fell from 50% in 1979 to just 29% in 85. So that's when I came of age and finished high school. Yeah, it had shrunken quite a bit. And now, of course, the United States is the biggest world oil producer now.
Yeah, and like you say, it spurred on all kinds of things, like the research that led to your house, which is a passive solar house. It's really just a super thick wall insulated house. And, it was one of the answers to having an energy crisis. But, as soon as the natural gas prices kind of went back down again, a lot of that was forgotten about. And, okay, it's cheap to heat your home with natural gas again. Okay, we'll just do that. All right, it's time for one of our favorite semi-recurring segments on the show called Oil Ban. Oil Ban has to do with President Joe Biden, just on his way out of office, announced that they are banning new offshore oil and gas drilling along 625 million acres of U.S. coastline, taking the total area of protected oceans up to 670 million acres. So he has the authority to do this under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, which allows him to regulate what happens in those waters. So, a nice kind of final gesture for Joe Biden as he is put out to pasture, as they say.
Literally. I wonder what else he's going to do. There's still days left until he's gone. He's probably trying to shore up as much of his legacy as he can because he knows what's coming. I don't know how much the Republicans can undo, but they do have total control of Congress, so that's kind of unpleasant. But yeah, good for Joe. And I'm surprised. I advocated for him stepping down and letting Kamala Harris take over as president a month early. Just Christmas Day or something, just to get the U.S. accustomed to having a woman. the world would not collapse, of course. So, well, Brian, now we're going to talk about the 25 predictions for this year. This is for our Patreon members. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts and get a full bonus episode or bonus segments like this one. So from Bloomberg, they did a special what to expect, and they said electric vehicle fever has cooled in some parts of the world, but not so much in China, which Bloomberg NEF forecast will represent 65% of all EVs sold globally this year. 65%. They were flirting with 50% in the summer and in some months, and now they're thinking the prediction is that they're going to hit 65%. Once you hit 65%, as in Norway did, you don't look back. There's no question that it's off and, running and unstoppable after that point. That's bad news for OPEC. I was reading a lot of stuff on oilprice.com, and their journalism is all skewed towards anti-EVs, just a little bit.
Yeah.
And pro, stories. Well, they're forecasting a bad year for OPEC. And it's mainly due to the unexpected happening that EVs could possibly account for anything in China. And that's what's happening. So China's responsible for supposedly half of the growth of oil in the world. And it's not working out the way they wanted. So now they're looking to India. India, please be good. Well, it's not going to be. They're going to electrify, not the same way that China does, because they don't have a communist government that says, this is the new rule and you're going to do this, and we're going to fund automakers to make EVs and shore up the supply chain from top to bottom. So the shift to electric led the nation's top oil company to move up its forecast for peak demand by 5 years to 2025. This is China. The oil company, the top oil company, said it would peak in 2030. They moved that up to 5 years to 2025. Brian, it is 2025. So analysts expect, unlike the rest of the world, a steep decline after that. So we're talking about plateau once we reach peak oil in the world, but in China, they're expecting a steep decline. Yeah, yay. Half of the world's oil consumption. Anyway, Brazil's UN climate talks look messy. COP30 will take place in Belém, a impoverished remote Amazon city without the infrastructure for global meeting that regularly draws rock concert levels of attendance. It does. A lot of people go to these things. Too many people go to these things. Oil lobbyists go to these things. Petro premiers from Canada go to these things. It won't be a surprise if events such as world leader gatherings are held in alternative locations or on different dates, because they're not going to be able to handle it. Accommodation is being hastily built. Ships have been considered for some lodging. I remember COPs take place in late November, early December, usually, every year. These are the climate talks from the UN. They are important for moving the world forward on addressing climate change. And they might even have to dredge some bodies of water to make these ships work.
Right.
It's a big deal. The fieristy exchanges will be between the nations over their individual climate ambitions. We'll probably have a different government in Canada by then. Trudeau just stepped down. Countries are due to submit new targets by early February, a deadline most will miss. Many proposed emission cuts are likely to be made conditionally, with some wanting to see finance flows first. Some of the EVs coming this year. We don't often talk about this. We used to. We would say, these 3 new EVs are coming. Now, there's too many to mention. I will not even get into them, but here's some important ones. If you're thinking about upgrading to an EV in North America, where we have limited, we don't have what Europe gets. They get Chinese automakers and lots of other options. The Volvo EX90, Volvo's flagship vehicle, is the XC90, a stately, practical 3-row SUV. It seats up to 7, can pack 500 horsepower, delivers around 300 miles or 480 kilometers of range. The Ram 1500 REV, that is going to be the Ram EV. There's also going to be a hybrid version where the gasoline engine will be small but can power a generator that powers the truck, so you always are in EV mode if you're towing. Love that idea, because I don't like a gasoline engine for towing, period. You don't want the transmission. You don't want all that crap. The 2025 Cadillac Escalade IQ, the Optique, the Vistique are all smaller SUVs as near as I can tell. So Cadillac is coming out with a bunch of vehicles from its GM parent. GMC Sierra EV pickup truck with 440 miles of range, or just over 700 kilometers. The Hyundai Ioniq 7, a three-row SUV. Jeep's first EV is the Wagoneer S. It's launching to rival the Model Y from Tesla. And Stellantis' STLA large platform has 600 horsepower and an estimated 300 plus miles of range. The Mini Countryman Electric, like those, 313 horsepower, yeah. 245 miles of range doesn't sound like much, but it's actually twice its predecessor when it comes to range. Toyota! Wow, Toyota's coming out with another EV, Brian. The Toyota BZ5X. Memorize that.
Yeah. They're just adding to the complicated naming structure. The last one was the 4X. Now we've got the BZ5X.
Okay, rumor has it they're actually going to come up with a name for this sucker.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Apparently, it's like they say, think Highlander, but electric, and it's going to rival the EV9. The Highlander is, of course, a popular big-ass SUV. It will be built in Indiana alongside a Lexus version of the same vehicle. And I'm excited about the Chevrolet Bolt EUV. That is the slightly bigger version of the Bolt. GM killed off the Bolt just as it was becoming popular, but the nameplate should be making a swift return at a similar price point. Switching to GM's newer Ultium battery tech should make the Bolt charge faster. Mine only charges at 54 kilowatts or something like that. And yeah, by the way, just yesterday, this is historic, Brian, I ordered the Tesla adapter so I can charge at the Tesla network.
Oh, cool. Who do you order that from?
A2Z. It is a Canadian company, but it is one of the two brands. Lectron is the other one, I think, that is making them. If you don't order them from the actual company, which no one is because it's taking them a year to send them out. Chevy, Ford, and all those people are taking a long time, and they're expensive. So they had a 25% off Boxing Day sale, and I jumped on it really fast because we have these PayPal money from the power company when you get $10 a month and then like 8 cents a kilowatt if you charge after midnight. This is a pilot program to see if people will respond to time of day pricing if they are incentivized. So we're part of it. Yeah. We get it sort of a little bit of money in PayPal.
Yeah, so you signed up for this program, they get the data from you, and you get a few bucks.
And the money piled up, and I talked my wife into doing it because it was a good price. She likes good prices. And yeah, it just gives us the option of charging on the Tesla network. So I'll be making a video about that, and I'll be talking about the adapter, which I'll have by next week's show. But the thing is, I ordered the wrong one.
Oh,
it's cheaper to go from like the one that you would use from CCS to the normal non-Tesla, public charger plug to a Tesla. So that one was like $50 cheaper. And I thought, oh, that's so cheap. I got to jump on that. And that was the wrong one. So I emailed them and I said, please cancel my order because they shipped them out really quick.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, first thing Monday morning, they had canceled my order, refunded the money. And then I took a couple of bucks from another PayPal account and threw it in there and then ordered it. So I may not have ordered it, but it was a 25% off discount code from Boxing Days. And I think if you're listening and interested, you might still be able to get that code. Just Google it and you'll get it easy enough.
Yeah, but the regular price is a couple $100, I think.
It's more than that. It's upwards of 320, I think.
Canadian,
yeah. So it was 205, I think. That's pretty good. Maybe it was a bit more than that, but yeah, it was. See, I had a price point where I thought this is worth it, this is not worth it, and because the one big thing against it is that the place that I might go to the most, Saskatoon, in the wintertime, and I actually would have used the Tesla charger last time I made that trip because one was broken. One of my non-Tesla chargers, CCS, they call them, was broken, which I filed a report for, and I assume it's fixed now. I'll check that out on PlugShare later, the app. And then one was being used. So I was in a damn hurry, as you know. Then I got a flat tire, so it didn't matter. But maybe I got the flat tire at the charger. So
yeah,
I would have went to the Tesla just right next door, literally 10 feet away. So, which they often are, at least in here. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the Chevy Bolt coming out with a new car. Well, you should see one fairly soon, and they say that it'll be out by the end of the year. So if that is out at the end of the year, then we should be having a look at the specs. And we expect that it'll charge 3 times faster. The peak speed will be 3 times faster, and it'll have decent range. Maybe not a whole lot of range, but yeah, and that would solve all the problems of a cheap EV, because if it charges fast.
And especially if you can charge also at the Tesla network.
Yeah, and it'll hopefully have a Tesla port right on it so that you'll be able to do that. So looking forward to that. All right, it's time to talk about Jimmy Carter and his solar push in 1979. There's a link to the New York Times story. I believe that is on our Patreon page, publicly available for everyone. There's no paywall or anything. And there's a clip there that you can also listen to his full speech there. It's restored, and it's in pretty good quality. And here's a clip.
It will be a tremendous, exciting challenge to the American people. A challenge as important as exploring our first frontiers or building the greatest industrial society on earth. By the end of this century, I want our nation to derive 20% of all the energy we use from the sun. Direct solar energy and radiation, and also renewable forms of energy derived more indirectly from the sun. This is a bold proposal, and it's an ambitious goal, but it is attainable if we have the will to achieve it.
And I don't know how attainable that was. I don't know what you think about that, because we obviously didn't reach that then.
Yeah.
We're there now.
Well, it makes me think of John F. Kennedy and his famous speech in the 60s where he talked about going to the moon, and they committed to going to the moon by the end of the decade.
If only the Ruskies were kicking our ass on solar development.
Well, exactly. It's obviously arguably more important. The solar thing is arguably more important than going to the moon, but it just doesn't have the sex appeal of Kennedy in that speech about, going to the moon by the end of the decade.
So, I mean, solar existed. I had a little solar cell on my calculator in the late 70s, early 80s. I remember that. That would power your calculator from the light bulb in your room. Pretty advanced stuff, but they were very, 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 very expensive, like 100 times more expensive per watt than they are now, or beyond that. So Carter talked about 10 or 15 minutes. No, it was about 11 minutes he talked. And I noticed, Brian, he didn't use a teleprompter and didn't use notes. This is a pretty smart guy, and he didn't phone it in. He thought this stuff out, very seriously, and then presented it to the public off the top of his head, and did he doesn't speak really fast, but he's certainly no Trump. He's certainly no Biden. They each have their own tics. So, I was really impressed by that. He really knew his stuff. In 1979, Carter had 32 panels installed on the roof of the White House. Now, these aren't solar panels as you and I know them, as most people know them, which are photovoltaic panels. Those are the panels that produce electricity from the sun. This is different. This is basically a rectangle that is deep, a few inches deep, and it has black paint on the bottom to absorb all the heat of the sun. Then it has copper tubing go through it that takes a liquid and heats it up in this panel. And then on top, you have a glass protector, which keeps all the heat in and gets super, super hot in there. So they put this fluid that's not quite water. It's got glycol in it, so it doesn't freeze. It's like an antifreeze water. They still make these today, kids. There's still people around in my very neighborhood with solar heaters on their roof that augment the heating of their hot water supply, and that's what these were meant to do. This was more common at the time, and this is what my house, which was built in 1979, had for heating the house, and it didn't work very well because they eventually took them down and installed a furnace. They thought they could do it, but they didn't quite insulate a few things in this house as well as they could have. anyway, and it gets very cold, 40 below here. So yeah, that fluid goes through these panels, gets super hot, and then it gets exchanged with the water that goes into your taps. It doesn't make contact with it. It just goes into a tank with the spiral copper tubing or stainless steel flexible tubing that goes into it, and then it transfers the heat from the glycol to the actual water that you're going to consume in the building. That's the kind of panels they were, but they were common. And, 32 of these suckers were on the roof. They were at an angle. Now solar panels that are on the roof of the White House for producing electricity are flat. We'll talk a bit about that later. But right now, these were at the perfect angle to pick up the sun, and you have to be to heat up this water. And they were removed just 7 years later by Reagan. Now, he didn't get vengeful and just take them down. They were doing roof repairs. They had to repair the roof. And yeah, they just didn't put them back. He didn't care to put them back. So yeah, there's a link there to the New York Times article on this. The article says, did you know that in 1979, President Jimmy Carter installed 32 solar thermal panels on the roof of the White House? At the unveiling, Carter made this bold statement, Brian, that this dependence on foreign sources of oil is of great concern to us all. No one can ever embargo the sun or interrupt its delivery to us. This is true. No matter what Saudi Arabia says, they are not going to block the sun.
Or Mr. Burns had a plan like that.
Or Mr. Burns. 7 years later, those panels went away, but it could have been the end of the story, Brian. But these panels have lived on. I don't know if you knew this, but they have lived on. In 1986, they were sold at a bargain price to Unity College, a small school in Maine. The person at that school saw them that they were available and thought, I'm going to buy them. Now, all he did is pay $500. There, some of the panels found new life heating water at the campus cafeteria, while the rest were kept as spare parts in an old chicken barn. So when you needed to repair the panels, because they are an active thing with water moving and, valves and all that, you needed spare parts for them. They had them there in the chicken barn. And these panels remained in use at this college until 2010. 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Just before the birth of my car. And yes, this is well beyond the year 2000. Jimmy said that they would last to. He said these are still going to be working on the White House in 2000, and he very well could have been, and perhaps should have been. He predicted they'd still be working. So yeah, over time, the remaining panels were scattered across the globe. One was donated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., where it is still on display today. Another found a home at the Solar Science and Technology Museum in Denzhou, China. And in 2010, yet another went to the Solar Energy Industries Association in the United States, to their headquarters. It's fascinating to think how these panels, once symbols of hope and innovation, have traveled so far and wide, continuing to tell their story decades later. So even though the panels didn't last long at the White House, his decision to support renewable energy helped position the United States for the clean power boom that is currently underway, experts told the New York Times. Quote, it was fundamental to the development and growth of these solar energy. I'm going to start again. It was fundamental to the development and the growth of the use of solar energy in the United States, said Frederick Morse, a senior Energy Department official under Mr. Carter and Mr. Reagan. In 2003, George W. Bush administration reinstalled some solar thermal heaters, although I can't find a whole lot of information on that beyond this story. Apparently that happened. It's probably a good idea to have some sort of backup heat and power at the White House if you're dealing with a nuclear holocaust and things like that. These units are used to heat water for landscape maintenance personnel and for the presidential pool and spa. These types of panels that I described earlier are commonly used for swimming pool heating. I have a different system which kind of works the same way, except the actual water goes through rubber mats with little rubber pipes in them, and that sort of sucks the heat up from the sun. It's not as efficient, but a professional swimming pool could use more expensive glass panels. 167 solar photovoltaic grid-tied panels were installed at the same time on the roof of the maintenance facility at the White House. That's a lot. The changes were not publicized. As the White House spokesman said, the changes were an internal matter. So they didn't want to talk about it. The story was picked up by industry trade journals, like solar trade journals were picking up the story because, their workers had to go install them. And we had one worker who installed something at the White House right into us once, which was
that's
cool. Right. So in 2010, Stephen Chu, the Secretary of Energy under Barack Obama, announced that solar panels would be reinstalled on the roof, saying that it was a way to move forward with a clean energy economy. And the White House will lead by example. They were really lobbied. I've seen video of people running up to Obama saying, put solar panels on the White House, will ya? And he said, it's a good idea, but it took a while. The panels were installed in 2013, making it the first time solar power would be used for the president's living quarters. And we have the full Carter video dedication speech available to everyone on our Patreon page for free. Come join us there and have a listen if you'd like to hear the whole thing, Brian. Coming up next, it's the lightning round. We'll be right back. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Oh, baby, I've got a lot of stories that I wrote this week, Brian. I don't know if my voice will make it to the end, but here we go. Boldly forward. Uber and Lyft are preparing to deploy robotaxis this year in select U.S. cities. New app features will allow users to use phones to open the trunk and honk the horn if they can't find the vehicle when it comes to pick you up. The companies are training crews to maintain the cameras and LiDAR, that is the little sensors on the cars that scan and make it not crash into things, and they are scouting idling and charging locations in different places. Where can these cars idle and charge? And, a lot of people in San Francisco aren't happy with all the robotaxis there. They're vandalizing them and getting mad.
Yeah.
They're calling them Roombas on 4 wheels, and they're not happy about it. I think the technology will improve so that they aren't congesting and getting confused. That's probably a smaller step to get forward on that. Hopefully, but also people are against robotaxis because they eat into public transportation. The companies are training crews to maintain the cameras and LiDAR, like I said, and hopefully they are using, I think, cars from different companies. Uber had its own self-driving program, and now they're just going to, they had a fatal accident, and then they stopped. I think they're going to use other people's technology now. Google's parent company, Alphabet's Waymo, is self-driving EVs are already operational in San Francisco, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Austin, Texas, with plans to expand to more cities this year. The Wall Street Journal reports that both Uber and Lyft are preparing to have robotaxis on their apps starting this year, and Uber has partnered with Waymo to deploy Uber Waymos in its self-driving Jaguar I-Pace EVs in Austin, Atlanta, and other places starting this year. Lyft has partnered with startup May Mobility, AV technology, autonomous vehicle technology, that is. Company Mobileye and Dashcam from firm Nexar are going to deploy robotaxis in Atlanta. Brian, it seems to be, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but it seems to be coming together, the robotaxi thing.
Yeah, well, the buzz around the internet is that this might be the year of robots. This is maybe the year, and I talked about that robot vacuum cleaner with the arm. Yeah, this is the year maybe where some of this stuff starts to come true, because robotaxis really are robots on wheels.
Solar had a record year, up 29% year on year worldwide. So it was already big last year, the year before, 2023, and jumped another 30%. They said it could be done, but the electric crossover Mustang from Ford significantly outsold the gas-powered Mustang in 2024. There's a link to that story. Oh, it's time for a CS Fast Fact. There are more living 84-year-olds than 1-year-olds in South Korea today. Just suck on that for a second. More 84-year-olds than 1-year-olds. And I don't know the full story, but I do know that there's a divergence between young women and young men there, that the young men are kind of being jerks and the women are being more nice, and they're not getting together with the men and making babies like they used to. That's one thing.
Plus they got those Squid Games that are wiping all kinds of people
Squid Games are taking out so many people. And maybe they've got a good healthcare system that's keeping 84-year-olds alive. I don't know, but good for them. Chinese auto giant BYD achieved spectacular growth in 2024. Sales were up 40% year on year to a record 4.3 million vehicles. That's not just EVs, that's all vehicles. Some interesting backstory items. 91% of BYD sales were inside China, so foreign markets are going to be very key to growth for that company, and they're going to want to expand. German renewables covered 125% of electricity demand on New Year's Day. That's incredible. So, you know.
Germany making real progress with renewable energy.
China policy now is that by the end of 2025, fixed route vehicles like buses, postal carriers, garbage trucks, they all must be 100% electric by the end of this year. And I think like 30% of all government vehicles or something like that. They're also offering more cash for clunkers programs to get gas cars off the roads. So that's important and not good for our friends at OPEC. An accelerated build-out of chargers as well. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, says thanks to next-generation geothermal technologies, geothermal has the potential to produce more electricity than any clean energy source, but solar. That is kind of surprising to me because I thought wind would always be better than geothermal, but geothermal has improved technologies which makes it easier and able to access more locations. However, my caveat is that it's going to take too long because, we're dealing with one here that's like 5 years in and they still not online.
It's a slow process, I think, to build, but the amount of energy buried under the earth sounds like it's more or less infinite. So if we can figure out a way to get to it, that's a great solution.
And of course, that is 24/7 electricity, which is important in a renewable variable energy world. Residential solar installations could save U.S. homes an average of $1,900 a year on energy bills, according to a study from pvtech.org. That link there should be in your show notes. Somalia opens tender for hybrid solar project. That is a tender that is open for the design, supply, and installation of 10 megawatts of solar, small solar farm. We have a couple here where we live. Kind of disappointing in their size. But the weird thing is, they're going to have a 20 megawatt hour storage of batteries right next door. That's a lot of batteries. The ratio between batteries and solar is very unusual for that. So I wonder if economics or, what's going on there.
Yeah, well, I think we'll just see more of that as the price of batteries drop because, of course, grid storage batteries were just too expensive a few years ago, and so you would tend to make them very small. But as batteries become cheap, why not just make the battery storage bigger?
China is planning 48,000 kilometers of high-speed rail by 2030. They've already got a good chunk of that going. Forecasters warned that a significant Santa Ana wind event this week could help wildfires spread quickly and erratically across many interior areas of California. Utility companies, I said that they may preemptively cut off power to some customers, and I think that's going to happen. We're talking about 100 mile per hour or 160 kilometer per hour gusts in the mountains. So if you have this has happened before, but they're saying it wasn't this dry before. So this is a very kind of dangerous situation for California this week. There is a link to that story in the New York Times. U.S. President Joe Biden, I'm going to skip that because we already talked about it. So finally this week, oil demand is expected to weigh on oil prices again in 2025 as China expects its demand to peak this year. That oil demand in China peaking this year, maybe this month. CNBC said earlier this month that it expected demand growth to peak in 2025, moving the peak year from 2030. And that was their prediction in 2023. That's a fast-moving change of prediction. Yeah. The next year, you change it up 5 years. So now oil fans are looking to India as the new driver of oil demand growth. Now, obviously, a different country from China, as I've said before, but we have no reason to believe there won't be a strong push to electrification of transportation there. Not as fast as China, because China has many EV makers making cheap EVs and really good manufacturing and a communist government that can do whatever the hell they want to. But those EVs are getting cheaper and better and will come into play in India as well. Chinese automaker BYD will launch the Sea Lion. I think that's their most popular vehicle, the Sea Lion 7, with 500 kilometers of range by March of this year in India. They already are established in India. The BYD Performance Electric SUV will join the likes of Atto 3, Seal, and EMAX 7 in the Chinese EV giant's India portfolio. Now, India's own Tata Motors will continue to grow as well, and it's making electric scooter makers in China. There's a lot of those. That's taking off. There's a link there for you to look at. 2025 is poised to see a surge in electric vehicles, with green cars launching across various price ranges, most of them SUVs, which is, a market, but not the biggest market, obviously, in India. Nearly every car maker, a latecomer Maruti Suzuki, Hyundai, luxury brands like Mercedes and Audi, local giants like Mahindra and Tata Motors, and China's BYD plans to roll EVs this year. All kinds of new EVs coming to India, and that is something we'll be watching. This wave comes despite concerns over slow adoption in India and limited charging infrastructure. The government's push for clean mobility, driven by worries over pollution and fuel import costs, has accelerated EV adoption. Obviously, India has some terrible air quality problems, but it's not all from cars, but it is a chunk of it is from cars. And companies are also under pressure to meet stricter emission norms or face heavy penalties, while petrol, diesel, hybrids, and CNG cars will still launch. EVs will still the spotlight in 2025 as predicted. That's our lightning round.
All right, you survived the big, long lightning round, and that's our show for this week. You can contact us at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. On social media, we're Clean Energy Pod, and you can join the Patreon community for free to get some special posts on there. That link is in your show notes. And you can also support the show with a purchase from our merch store, which is on our website and also in the show notes.
Use promo code January15, that's January15, for 15% off all Clean Energy Show merchandise now until the 15th of January. January 15th is your promo code. Go to the store, buy something if you like. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or favorite podcast app, whatever you're listening to us on. Give us a review. And if you haven't already, remember to follow us on your podcast app to get new episodes delivered every week. And we will see you again in 1 week.
See you next week.
The Clean Energy Show.